This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. Like many people, I've come into the new year full of hopes and aspirations for the next 12 months. Maybe, like me, you're anxiously pacing the floor waiting for the F1 season to begin, or perhaps you've set yourself a more regular fitness goal, like running your first marathon or commuting to work by bike. Whatever you plan to do in 2025, come into your own way with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Powered by Live Hydroscience, Liquid IV helps you break the mould. Liquid IV is so easy and convenient to tear, pour and enjoy, and it comes in several fantastic flavours, like their new Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free Raspberry Lemonade, and other winners like White Peach and Rainbow Sherbet. As a regular flyer, I know how easy it is to become dehydrated, almost without knowing it, when you're travelling. That's why I always take Liquid IV on overseas trips. It's more than just a drink, and it's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water provides 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients. And what's more, it's always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
Ever feel like everything's getting more expensive? Groceries, rent, even breathing. And let's not forget car insurance. It just keeps creeping up. But here's the thing. Insurify makes one part of life easier. It's an insurance comparison site that finds real-time quotes from dozens of top insurers. Insurance companies compete for your business, driving down prices. It's like having a friend who knows all the best deals, but without the smug grin. You could save as much as $1,025 a year, and you might even cut your bill in half. The best part, it's all online. No phone calls, no spam, no nonsense. You could be covered in as little as 10 minutes, and with an excellent star rating on Trustpilot, saving feels less impossible. So why not give it a shot? Visit Insurify.com and see how much you can save. That's INSURIFY.com. Average potential savings based on initial quotes received by 183,234 customers seeking insurance through Insurify. Actual savings may vary depending on state of residence, individual circumstances, coverage selections, and insurance provider. Savings results are not guaranteed.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and Aston Martin became the latest team to reveal its 2025 car ahead of its first on-track running on Monday. But with its main focus on next year's new regulations, should we have low expectations, or could it spring a surprise? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to take on those questions and many more are first Jon Noble and then Gary Anderson. Right, Jon, it's fair to say that this is one of the lower key launches. Obviously it's not really a launch, they've released some renders and they're going to run tomorrow, but also Aston Martin, it feels like a little bit of a nothing year, doesn't it? How does it seem to you? Because on the one hand it's all about next year, but on the other hand they can't just afford to give up, can they?
No, it's very, very low key for Aston Martin. They've been one of the few teams in recent years who've done quite impressive launches. We've been up at the factory before. They obviously put a big effort into F1 75 last week, probably one of the most interesting reveals. But today, it's kind of the most basic launch a team can do these days is send out a press release and a couple of renders. So that's basically what they've done. But equally, there is some interesting detail in it, and I think it does highlight that this is a season where they can't just sit back and do nothing and not worry about dropping down the order. They've got to make progress, and I think we are seeing the first kind of shoots of Andy Cowell's influence at the team and a different direction on the technical front coming through.
And they've talked up the car a little bit in that they've said Andy Cowell said it's almost completely new aerodynamically. There's various different numbers thrown around, which all of which just add up to it's changed a lot. It's not just last year's car not putting any effort into it. So it's very clear that they're trying to get to the bottom of some of the problems they've had. Really, these started to set in 23 when they were trying to develop that car that started the season so well, and it kind of got away from them. And then 24 was a similar thing. Car started not quite as well, but okay, and then tried to upgrade it and it just got away from them. So that's the story they're trying to change, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the team said today 90% of the aero surfaces are different this year. So, there's big changes to the wings, the side pods, the floor. But I think it all boils back to a change of philosophy, which has kind of come in from Andy Cowell. They had the upgrade in Austin last year with a new floor. Didn't work. Disaster. So then they spent the rest of the season kind of tracking back and working out where it had gone wrong. And I think in general terms, Andy Cowell's said to this team, look, we can chase peak downforce and ultimate downforce and all the performance we want, but it's useless if the drivers can't drive the car. We need a more benign car, a car that the drivers can have confidence with, a car that has a wider operating window. Because I think time and again we've seen with Aston, they can be quick. They bring an upgrade in, which I'm sure in the wind tunnel gives them some beautiful figures. Stick it on the car, and you end up with this trap that a lot of teams have fallen into. The car has bouncing problems, or it gets very nervous. It loses that good feel that the drivers have, and then the performance drops away from there. So I think Andy Cowell said to them, look, it's usable downforce. We need, even if the peak's not as high, even if the wind tunnel numbers are saying a different direction will give us more theoretical downforce, I want maximum usable downforce. I want a benign car. I want a car the drivers can use. And I think that's where they see their route to better results.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. This is a process, actually, that pretty much all the teams have had to go through. With the old regulations, you could just keep piling on downforces, and as long as it wasn't stalling or causing problems, you'd get more pace out of it. But these are much more three-dimensional, as I like to say. I did ask Dan Fallows, who was the technical director at Aston Martin F1, he's now moved out of that role, and I interviewed him towards the end of last year, if he felt it was fair to say that Aston was one of the slower ones in realising how they had to change things, which he did concede was the case. Because now it's much more, I guess McLaren are emblematic of this, that ability to sort of do all your design loops through CFD, through wind tunnel, through track validation, and just be really robust and rigorous in making sure that not only you're getting the numbers, and Fallow said the car was giving the numbers we expected, but gives it in a way that the drivers can actually drive to without having that instability and just lacking confidence and struggling and not knowing when the car's going to catch them out.
Yeah, I think it's the robustness of the systems, and it's one of the problems all the teams have had, because you cannot test these cars at their kind of peak downforce levels and the speeds they're doing in some of the higher corners in the wind tunnel. So you've got this disconnect between what you want to test and can actually test. So when you're designing a car, you can only ever really tell what it's like at a track. And then if you get a disconnect of numbers, if the numbers in the wind tunnel are saying, actually, this new floor has given us 10 more points of downforce, it's amazing. But then you get to track where those 10 points of downforce are useless because it's pitching the car onto the ground, it's bouncing, it's costing the drivers confidence. So there's all these issues. And various teams have woken up to this problem at different times. I remember Carlos Sainz back in 2023, I think it was. They come to Spain, they'd had a problem, and Carlos had said to the team, look, I know the setup is telling us, and the numbers and the computers are saying we need to do one direction, but actually if we just lift the car up a little bit, make it theoretically less quick, but give me more confidence, the lap time will come. So I think all teams have kind of woken up to this at differing times, and I think this has come through Aston Martin now into this season.
And I think it's really important because while this season on-track results don't matter a huge amount, I mean, they always matter for any team, but this isn't the season they need to be winning. But the thing is, if they can't put a car on the track and it does what they expect it to do, and it is more benign, and then they can't put some upgrades on it that work as they expect, that can be used, then there's no reason to think they can get the 26 car right. Because even though the 26 car is completely new with no carryover, it's all those processes and methods and the underlying science, as I like to call it, that's going into it. So I think the 25 car is a really important test laboratory, if you like, for those 26 aspirations.
I think you need to understand the concepts and the systems this year. You can't pretend that you come into the air, you put bits on, you don't know if they work or not. Doesn't really matter because everything's for 26. I think you still need to understand that your wind tunnel's working, your CFD's working, that your engineers understand what these cars are. Are all your aero platforms, clicking into place? Are the drivers happy? All these elements still need to be there, that understanding. So even if development's turned off at some point, because most teams will be switching stuff off by the summer, actually there's still huge potential, as we've seen numerous teams have, to getting extra performance from understanding these cars better. So I think any team can argue, if they slip down the order this year, that it doesn't matter. We're focusing on 26, but actually you need to gauge your performance, you need to gauge your understanding. And I think Aston Martin, after what it had last year, strong start, disappointing second half of the season, has to be more consistent all the way through.
I think in that regard, they're probably one of the teams that's most in need of this season as that test bed, if you like. There's a few teams that have struggled a lot, while others have started to get this sort of thing right. So that's what I'm really interested in. And I think the important thing for me is it doesn't necessarily matter whether they're fourth, fifth, sixth best team or whatever, but just that gain and that improvement that it's doing what they expect it to do, because they got some ridiculous situations really the past 18 months in that they've been mixing and matching upgrades. Back end of last season they were switching between floor specs, weren't they, based on whether it was a high speed or a lower speed circuit. So sometimes the Suzuka floor was being thrown back on. I remember Suzuka was early in the season, and then it was a later one, and they just sort of thought, well, this is actually the best we could do. And I felt quite sorry for the team trackside actually, because they kept being given bits that fundamentally couldn't be repeatably, consistently used. So it for me, it's all about the factory side.
Yeah, I think Andy Cowell will want to see that this team understands exactly, what is coming from the factory. It will want the race team to understand what it needs to do at the racetrack. This is why Andy's restructured things. He's become team principal. He's moved Mike Crack into a more kind of race operations role on race weekends, so we can focus more on maximising those opportunities that come on Grand Prix weekends. So even if developments that are coming forwards don't, deliver 2, 3, 4 tenths or any magic numbers over the season, what Andy will want to see is that the team understands what's happening in the car, that it understands where improvements are happening, that it understands the dynamics at play, and it's just a season of steady progress, not a season where they introduce something like what happened in Austin, proves a disaster, and then you've got to try and retrack and dig yourself out of this hole and try and recover.
Yeah, and if it doesn't work as hoped, then there's going to be some alarm bells ringing at Silverstone, but I suspect things should go pretty well with this car.
Love, exciting and new. Hello, Hannah Waddingham here. Have you seen the fabulous new Sun Princess? World-class entertainment, exceptional dining, and the greatest pizza ever. It's
Don't miss our Come Aboard sale with up to 40% off and free room upgrades. Visit princess.com or call your travel advisor to book. Princess Cruises. Terms and restrictions apply. Offer ends 2/28/25. Ships at Bermudan and British Registry.
Flex your business with an American Express Business Gold Card. You'll earn 4 times membership rewards points on your top 2 eligible spending categories, like transit and electronics, each month, on up to $150K in combined purchases per year. Plus, you can now earn 3 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. Terms and points cap apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold, built for business by American Express.
This episode is brought to you by Nerds Gummy Clusters, the sweet treat that always elevates the vibe. With a sweet gummy surrounded with tangy, crunchy nerds, every bite of Nerds Gummy Clusters brings you a whole new world of flavor. Whether it's game night, on the way to a concert, or kicking back with your crew, unleash your senses with Nerds Gummy Clusters.
Inevitably, John, with the eye on 2026, as we talked about, the 25 car's important in that. The arrival of Adrian Newey, which is a few days away, is the key point, isn't it? So Newey's coming in, Enrico Cardile coming in as well from Ferrari as Chief Technical Officer, although the exact start date, I think we're still waiting on when that will be for him. So this is, I like to think of this as the version of the team that's kind of re-optimised and restructured for the new world it's in. It's expanded rapidly, moved into that new factory, and then they've had to shuffle everything around, change the technical leadership, and this is the version of the Aston Martin team that, if it lives up to expectations, will take it on to glory in 26 or beyond with Honda engines.
Yeah, I think that's the aim. Obviously, huge hopes for Adrian Newey to come in and deliver progress, but I don't think he turns up on March the 3rd, Monday morning, and then jots some stuff down on his drawing board and next race suddenly they're half a second quicker, and it's a miracle. It's going to take much longer than that. I'm sure he'll have some ideas. I'm sure he'll have some feedback and concepts on what this car was. And I think what the team especially lacked over recent years was someone who fully understood the dynamics of these Grand Effect cars, that they are tricky beasts and they're very complicated, and nailing the car balance through the range of corners from low speed, high speed, different tracks, different types of surfaces, that's been the key to success. And when teams have unlocked it, look at McLaren, look at Mercedes middle of last year, look at Ferrari, they're right there. Bang, the pace can get unleashed. But not all teams have done it. And it's still very easy for teams to make missteps. Ferrari in Spain last year, Mercedes second half of last year was a bit disappointing. So it will be about pushing on, and it will be interesting to see what Enrico and Adrian can bring in just terms of just nudging that understanding of what makes a successful Grand Effect car.
Yeah, I'd imagine one of the first things that they'll both be doing is looking at those processes that we've talked about, how you do all those loops of development and validation using the various tools, because that's something that's really important. They've clearly made improvements now, Aston Martin, on that, but that's something that can be looked at and say, well, do this, and then you might see a little bit more yield from the upgrades that are being bought this year before the taps are turned off. So that's an area where probably Newey, for example, can have a little bit of an impact on 25, but obviously he said his concentration is on 26. That said, he did say, I'm sure Lawrence Stroll will want me to do something with 25 to improve the results as well. So he's definitely going to have a look at it. But yeah, this is the big picture project, isn't it? And of course, aside from all those processes, there's a new wind tunnel that's been completed, the new driver in the loop simulator. They're basically getting everything, but all of these things have come along in the past few years. They've been staffed. The structure of the team is completely transformed because it's gone from a really pretty small team punching above its weight to now one that's trying to compete with the biggest teams in Formula One. So it's a chance for all of that to coalesce and consolidate, isn't it, under Newey, who they'll be pretty excited to have starting work.
Yeah, those processes have got to be in place. There's no point in having people like Newey and Cardier in place if there's breakdowns and miscommunication and silos and those departments are not working together. The critical thing, if Aston Martin are going to make a success of 26 or 27, is that the factory elements are all working. That the wind tunnel's feeding into CFD's feeding into wind tunnel, that's feeding into track. All the departments are working together. Adrian will come in and he probably won't waste time worrying about the bits that are working. His focus will be on making sure the bits that aren't working can get improved and sorted, because he needs all those processes have to be sorted and in place this season for them to jump into 26. It's not a case of Adrian, rocks up, does a nice drawing of a 26 car, hands it over to the team and they get on and do it. It's much deeper, much more reliant on everything about him, behind him, pushing those processes on, making sure it's all working and ticking all the boxes in the process to make sure that the gestation of an idea he has ends up on track and working.
Which is all very simple to say, but very, very challenging to do. And obviously the 26 car has long since been underway. They'll have been doing some wind tunnel tests with 2026 geometries because that could be done right at the start of the year. So he's coming in to full-time work while that project's going on. But I think the other thing that's worth stressing is that Newey, when they announced him last year, stressed that he would be full-time initially anyway. It's not going to be like a Red Bull kind of consulting sort of thing. He's come in to give his absolute maximum commitment to this team, to this project. So I imagine there's going to be a lot going on because he's going to be there all the time. He's got his big drawing board in his office. Andy Cowell was telling us the other day at the O2 event. So yeah, absolutely ready to go. It's interesting, isn't it? We talked about a revitalised Lewis Hamilton recently at Ferrari, but I wonder if we're going to also get a very much revitalised Adrian Newey, who's admitted to not thinking he'd have it in him at this age to start again with another team, but seems to be revelling in the challenge.
Yeah, I think he will like what he sees at Aston Martin. It's a team at the cutting edge. It's got the latest wind tunnel, latest simulator, the newest factory. Everything's there that he needs. Adrian Newey is tech obsessed. He just loves it. And if that enthusiasm and spark is there again, if he can come into an environment he feels comfortable with, he can shape it in his own kind of vision, and have around him the processes and structures and people that he can rely on and trust, then I think, there's no reason the magic can't happen. He will want to be isolated from, politics and all the stuff that in the past he's, not particularly liked, whether it was Williams, whether it's McLaren, whether it's Red Bull. There were aspects of being a front-running team that he wasn't a huge fan of. But what he is a fan of is designing racing cars that beat everybody else on the grid, and it's winning championships.
He's also a great pragmatist as an engineer, and that's why I think he can have a little bit of impact on 2025, because he's very good at working out problems and working out sensible solutions, not getting caught up in what the right philosophy is or anything. It's like, right, does this work or does it not? How do we go about fixing it? He doesn't get carried away with grand ideas. And if the lowliest person in the team makes a suggestion that's a good one, he's happy to take it on board. There's no ego on that. So I think he'll be quite useful in 25, and just a few little shots, if you like, of his magic, even though I'm sure 99.9% will be on 2026. But it'll be interesting to see, and that should improve the chances of the upgrades. And obviously the upgrades that will be introduced in the season, they're in the pipeline at the moment, so there's only so much you can do with them, but that makes them a kind of extra test of the early Newey, if you like. But I think it's worth briefly mentioning, you've alluded to Andy Cowell and the role he's played. I think he's somebody who is pretty much going to prove crucial in terms of this team taking that next step. He's the restructure guy, isn't he? He's the guy getting everything working for Newey's magic to work and to make sure they get the most out of the other very capable people. They've got a hugely accomplished team, brought in people from all sorts of other operations as they've expanded. So he's the person that could be the unsung hero if they do have success in 26. Everyone will quite rightly say, well, Adrian Newey. But actually, Andy Cowell will be a huge player. Yeah, Andy's had huge success at Mercedes. He understands what a world championship winning team is like. And he's not afraid to make tough decisions. He came in the end of last year. He knew what he knew and knew what he didn't know. He had a crash course in aerodynamics. I think when he saw that Austin floor didn't work after having all the high hopes, everybody was convinced it was going to be a step forward. It wasn't. He responded. He acted. There was this the change of approach. Dan Fallows was moved aside. Then over the winter, we see other changes. We see Andy taking on the team principal role. He wants to end these kind of silos, wants to end this kind of situation in the past where people were spread too much across race team operations, factory operations. It wasn't working. People were spread too thinly. So I think he just sees simple engineering approaches to very complicated problems. He's willing to make changes. He's willing to make sure that people are put in jobs and roles and situations where they play to their strengths. And he's been quite impressive in doing it in a very kind of Andy Cowell kind of low profile way. He doesn't, wander around the paddock and screaming and shouting and for the cameras. He just gets on and does the job. And it's those same strengths, he utilised at Mercedes. Even though he was only primarily focused on the engine situation, I think he understood a lot about championship winning teams, what was needed, what those processes are, what the structures are, what the mindset should be. And all that is kind of filtering through now at Aston Martin. Yeah, and he's talked about the need to stop everybody getting caught up in bureaucracy and spending too much time writing reports and that kind of thing, and actually being creative and innovative and doing things. So we've heard that sort of talk from a few other teams, notably McLaren, of course. So it's all the same sort of things we're hearing the successful teams doing. So the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, as it were, but the records of people like Cowell, of Newey, and a lot of the people in that team are very, very positive. So yeah, this 2025 car, not necessarily the start of something big, but it could be the prelude to something big. It is going to be an important car, I think. Yeah, but I think, as we said before, this is a season where the processes have to be in place. This isn't a season where the car has to be there and winning for it to act as a platform, springboard to a championship in 26. This is a year where the processes and systems and structure and staff all have to be in place, all have to be firing in the same direction. If that happens, then I think we can have quite high hopes for them in 26 and belief that,
maybe this is a team that can fight for the championship sooner rather than later.
Exactly. So keep your eyes peeled for when the upgrades appear, in particular during the season. How cheerful Fernando Alonso is with life early on.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
So good, so good, so good.
Get ready, because it's time to save at your Nordstrom Rack store. Now through February 23rd, take an extra 40% off red tag clearance boots, jackets, and sweaters. We're talking the best cold weather styles from Vince, Cole Haan, Sam Edelman, and more. All on sale for even less. All sales final. You never know what you'll find, but you know it's gonna be so good. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
Every cup of Nespresso coffee is an invitation to transform your morning routine into a ritual you can treasure each and every day. Using the Virtuo Pop, a simple touch of the button freshly brews bold aromas and a rich, velvety crema layer for delicious cafe-quality coffee at home. Whether you enjoy your coffee hot or over ice, every sip, every morning is unforgettable. Nothing tastes like Nespresso coffee. Visit Nespresso.com or our app to explore our full range of easy-to-use machines and coffees not found anywhere else.
Well, as always in our launch podcasts, I'm joined by Gary Anderson now to give the technical rundown on the car. Obviously, as we always like to point out, this is your old team effectively. You were the founding technical director back in the Jordan days. It's come quite a long way since then. But what do you make of the car? They've talked up how new it is aerodynamically. Not more than 90% new aerodynamically, almost 100% new aerodynamically, depending on who you listen to. So lots of change, they say. What do you see? Is there enough change in this car to change their fortunes?
Well, it's one of those sort of things. I mean, I would say that the Aston Martin team now in their factory facilities is definitely a step ahead of what we were at Jordan when we first went to that site over, where the new factory is now. Huge amount of changes within the team as well. But going on to the car, I'm really not seeing anything that makes me jump out as getting excited. It's a neat and tidy little package. It's, there's the details all there, I suppose you might call it. But there's nothing sort of, and it's not revolutionary, I think you're trying to say. There's nothing sort of excites me about what I've seen. Like the front and rear suspension system, in reality, looks very similar to last year. Still push rod operated front suspension. Doesn't look as though they've changed the anti-dive at all. The rear suspension, it's very difficult from the pictures I've seen so far, but if anything, they've reduced the anti-lift on the rear of the car. So again, they must have done some of these things for a certain reason. As far as I know, they use the Mercedes gearbox and rear suspension package. But at the end of the day, you can alter some things yourself. So it's not as though we're seeing what Mercedes might come up with, I don't think. But it sort of wouldn't surprise me. Aerodynamically, feature-wise, the front wing's a bolt-on component. They made a big thing about how they've changed the front wing to give more low-speed front end, more low-speed downforce. It's very, very difficult to actually sort of divide low-speed downforce from high-speed downforce. The trend is that with wanting to get more low-speed downforce, you put on gurney flaps onto the front wing trailing edge, a right-angle flap, and that trips the flow up. It sort of exaggerates the wing angle, I suppose you might call it. So for a given wing angle, if you back the front wing angle off and put a gurney flap on it, theoretically, you would probably get more low-speed downforce and a very similar high-speed balance than if you just put wing angle on. So it's a difficult thing to sort of really rationalize that in a wind tunnel. You can do it in CFD. You can see how the flow changes for various flow speeds. So yes, I mean there is a chance that the geometry of the front wing with the different chord lengths of the flaps, etc., will generate more downforce at lower speed, and not necessarily generate more downforce at higher speed. But it's, again, that's one of the things that's circuit specific, what you really want from it. So until they hit the track, I don't think we'll really know. So going back through the car, if that's all right, the side pod inlets, the radiator intakes have changed to the more conventional top shelf on the radiator inlet duct. And again, it's, the wake coming off that front wing is coming through that gap between the front wheel and the chassis. So it's important to make sure you work the front wing as hard as possible, or you allow the front wing to work as hard as possible by allowing that flow to come through where the suspension members are and not be restricted by too much. So this lower shelf, I suppose you might call it, on the radiator intake, or higher shelf of the radiator intake, is sort of where the wake of the front wing starts to sort of separate. You want to get as much high energy flow as possible over the top of the side pod, which is really the flow coming off the top of the front wing, and the lower section of the front wing you want to be able to work as hard as possible, so no blockage behind that. So the height of that sort of shelf for the radiator intake is quite important in relationship to how the front wing's working, the positioning of it and the height of it. So again, another little detail that's changed, but they haven't changed it to something new. They changed it to something that the other guys have got.
And obviously, as part of that quite visual change to the side pod, they say a more aggressive undercut. They've got that more pronounced channel now in the top surface, feeding down to the back of the car. Does that all look in the right sort of direction for you?
Yeah, I mean, the gully between the on the top surface really is it's a bit of a strange thing in a way. You see the big outer top radius on the outside edge of the side pod. That's part of the regulations. There's a minimum radius you can have on the bodywork through that area. So you wouldn't have that normally. You'd have more of a fin arrangement there if you were wanting to try to contain that flow. So it's that radius takes up quite a big section of the side pod and leaves you with a gully. Some teams have gone for a fairly narrow gully. I'd say that Aston have got as big a one as possible. It's sort of instead of bringing the flow in around the Coke bottle area and between the rear wheel and the inner bodywork, you're bringing it sort of down the top surface. Something you need to be a little bit careful of there is if the flow is good in that area and it accelerates over the top of the side pod, the leading edge of the side pod, it can actually generate lift in that area. So you need to be a little bit careful. But it is one of those sort of things as well where it can help with the sensitivity of the car, because obviously the bodywork underneath the car, the throat of the underfloor is in about that same position. So you're generating downforce from that throat underneath the car, and you can generate a little bit of lift on the top surface, which at high speed, when the car's getting nearer to the ground, could actually help in balancing the car. But it's never good to generate lift to do that. It's not, it's a negative really. You're not getting the maximum grip out of the car and just allowing yourself to use it. So it's a bit of a strange area. The gully they have, the inner bodywork where it has to sort of go around the exhaust system, it's quite wide, so the gully gets narrower. There's about halfway along it, and you need to be careful with that, because if you've got that expanding duct as such, you want the flow to go through and be sucked in from the back of the car, then you need to make sure that you get decent flow all the way through it. Otherwise you can get sort of airflow separation. So you're taking those volumes and making sure that when it gets narrower, it actually gets deeper, and then when it gets wider again at the back, it actually gets shallower. It's the volume that counts. The flow doesn't really care whether it's sort of that much, whether it's narrow or tall. You just want the volume change to be fairly consistent. So a lot of detail can go into it, but it's all about getting as much airflow as possible into that centre part of the car and try to help the diffuser, especially at low ride heights. And as I say, with these ground effect cars, that last half of the floor, the outer edge, it's always difficult to reduce the leakage, because obviously the underfloors are at low pressure, so it's trying to pull air in from everywhere. And the more airflow you allow to be pulled in there, and underneath the floor, the more downforce you lose. So you just don't want that flow to be going underneath the floor. So really around that rear tyre, the airflow is really something that's quite complicated as far as what you're bringing in with the Coke bottle, making it narrower, that gully arrangement, how that all joins up. And as I say, you're trying to stop flow from going underneath the floor, which reduces the downforce. So it's a very, very, these cars are very, very complicated, I think, as far as the aerodynamic flow is concerned and how everything interacts with everything else. Because the big thing is you got these four wheels and tyres that are huge. And, you know, whether you like it or not, they're going to make a big hole in the airflow somewhere. And that airflow is getting displaced. And it's going to go somewhere else because it has to go somewhere else. So it's quite interesting to see how different teams go about the same set of problems.
Now, the thing that the team said that they focused on is getting the car more benign. They want increased rear stability in particular. They've had the problems being a little bit perhaps one-dimensional and just chasing downforce. Now, plenty of what you talked about, you can see why that could yield more downforce. Is there enough to go on visually to ask whether they've done enough that could make the car more benign and stable and consistent? Is there anything you can judge that on?
Well, I'm sort of going to be a little bit surprised if they really have reduced the anti-lift on the rear of the car as much as it potentially looks. You know, as I say, the angle of these shots is somewhat different, so it's very difficult to really sort of put numbers on it. But going just by the exhaust tailpipe, which is, you know, there's a set angle for it. So you can sort of take that as a relationship to the rest of the car. And it does look as though they've done away with some of that anti-lift. So, you know, that in theory, that means that the rear of the car will rise up more whenever you hit the brakes and corner entry, which I've never found that to be a good thing. Any time we've ever been able to hold the back of the car down through any sort of anti-lift characteristics on the car, it's always been a better package for braking and corner entry. You know, it does create other problems then mid-corner and exit because, you know, a corner is not just about braking and corner entry, but braking and corner entry is where the driver gets his confidence from. So, you know, so it's a case of just making sure that it's more about the aerodynamic balance, to be honest, and what happens during that transition period of arriving at a corner at, you know, 340 kilometers an hour, arriving at the end of a straight at 340 kilometers an hour, standing on the brake pedal and wanting to turn the steering wheel at, you know, 80 or 100 Ks and into that corner. That's 200 odd Ks of deceleration. And the feeling that the driver gets in the car is what gives them the confidence to turn the steering wheel. If the rear's nervous under that, you know, straight line braking as such, if the rear's nervous, he'll delay the turning in and he'll brake a little bit earlier and he'll turn in earlier just because he's not confident of the rear of the car. And then the thing is, you get to mid-corner, you have to put more steering lock on and the car understeers. You know, a lot of then experienced drivers will complain about the understeer, but actually you haven't got understeer. It's the rear's nervous and you can't sort of be aggressive with the turn in. Get the car turned on that initial part because that's the most important thing. Get as much rotation done of the car early on in the corner. In the first third of the corner, you want to get half of the corner taken really. And as I say, if the rear's nervous, you'll be a bit reluctant to turn the steering wheel. So I haven't seen anything dramatically on there yet that would make me convinced that oh yeah, they've got something here. The rear wing detail, again, they made out some statements about trying to use it to get more stability. The other cars we've seen have been separating the outer ends of the rear wing flap from the end plates and from the main plane, which again, you know, Aston Martin did last year. This year they look as though they've connected it all back up again, but the rear wing's like the front wing. It's a bolt-on component. So what we see now might not be what we see in Bahrain or Melbourne.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see what they run. They're actually doing their shakedown on Monday, so in the not-too-distant future as we're recording now, and then they're running public when testing begins on the Wednesday. So overall, your impression, Gary? We were talking in the first part of this podcast about the fact that the key for them this year is that at least the car does what they expect and they can put upgrades on it that don't create nasty characteristics, etc. Is that what you'd be looking for if you were there? Not too worried about the overall result, given the focus on next year, but proving your systems? Or would you be thinking, no, we actually need to really get some proper performance out of this? Just improving isn't enough.
Well, I think you have to get some proper performance. It's the 4th year of these regulations. Everybody will have learned a lot. But my problem with looking at Aston's performance last year and the year before even is that they went backwards from the season starting to the even the middle of the season, but mainly to the end of the season. They went backwards, and that's never good, because that's, once you're racing, you've got this sort of sets of data from 20 other cars, 10 other teams, that you're able to read the same as any other team is. So it's not as though it's a blind winter where you're working away flat out, in your own factory with the lights turned up. You're actually out there racing. The stopwatch tells no lies. You know where you are. You know where other cars are faster than you. Why they're, if they're faster just because they're more efficient, they accelerate off the corner better, or they carry more corner speed, or they brake later. Those facts are there for you to build your database to try to react to. And as I say, that doesn't happen over the winter. The winter's blind. It's all down to now. The teams will be saying, well, we've done a good job, we think. We've got more downforce and the car's stiffer and it's lighter, blah, blah, blah. But we don't know what the others have done. Whereas during the race season, you do know what the others are doing, where they're stepping forward at, what they've done to step forward. No team works blind once the season starts. Everybody looks at everything else that everybody else is doing. It's not as though you want to copy it, but you want to try and get a trend, a thought pattern through it, what they did and what improvement that made. So the last 2 years for Aston Martin have been dismal as far as that's been concerned. And I think it's now time for them to stand up and show that they've learned something, and they need to make that work for them. But as I say, the car looks neat, tidy. It's simplified, the bodywork, profiles, etc. They're nothing as complicated as what some of them were last year. But nothing's jumping out at me and saying, wow, keep an eye on this one.
Well, let's see what they come up with when they hit the track imminently. Thanks very much for that insight, Gary. If you'd like more from Gary, head to therace.com and don't forget the hyphen, because Gary's in-depth technical analysis has, in fact, as we speak, just gone live there. He's been poring over the photos, so there's more for you to take a look at there. And, of course, the Race F1 Tech Show will be starting again after testing, if you'd like a regular dose of Gary. Well, we've got a few more car reveals to come before testing starts, even though testing gets going on Wednesday, so stay with us for everything you need to know from F1 launch season.
The Athletic.